We've had our first upset of the World Cup, and it was Lionel Messi's Argentina. Here he is on the screen in front of me in the Argentina 11. And if you want to find out more about this World Cup, we've got loads of content dropping on our channel. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel, and there is a bell notification button below me on the screen that you can click so that everything that we release will drop straight into your feed. So how do you astonish a team like Argentina with all of that talent that they have? Well, the first thing that you have to do is be a little bit lucky. Oh no, here's Jon with all of his negative comments and his context. But let's just get this out of the way so we can then look at what Saudi Arabia did really well. How did Saudi Arabia get lucky? Well, they only had 3 shots in the game. All of those 3 shots came within 5 minutes, and they scored 2 goals from them. So let's just have a look at the board. I've got the Opta Analyst shot map from the game. As you can see, these are all of Argentina's chances. They total up to around 2.2 expected goals. They only scored 1, obviously, from the penalty spot through Lionel Messi. Saudi Arabia, here are those 3 shots. And we can take a look at those shots individually as well, just to see how they develop them. So this is the first goal that they scored. They did this really well, really direct ball through the middle. They got their 2 centre forwards isolated against the Argentina centre backs, and whenever you're doing that, you are asking for trouble. And that meant that Shehri here could get 1v1 against Christian Romero, went around him and had a very low value chance into the bottom corner, but did what he needed to do, and that was the equalising goal for Saudi Arabia. And then a few minutes later, the second shot comes in from the edge of the box, so very low value chance, but it gets headed away by the centre back, drops down to Salem Dawsari, and he is able to beat a few players and takes, again, another low value shot from the edge of the box. So a little bit of luck there, but they did exactly what they needed to at the beginning of the second half to get back in the game, get ahead, and then they were able to hold it out. So obviously a lot of what's going on here is out of possession. So what did Saudi Arabia do out of possession to cause problems for Argentina? Well, to answer that question, we need to look at what a lot of teams are doing in this World Cup, and that is playing in a mid-block. Now, when we talk about mid-blocks, what we mean is that the team who are out of possession, so let's imagine that Saudi Arabia have the ball here, they're going to sit in a possession shape, probably not going to engage until the halfway line pretty much, so you might expect to see the 2 centre forwards in this sort of position, and then the rest of the team falling into a very structured shape behind them. So something like this. And what you're going to do is you're going to allow the opposition to have possession of the ball. They can play it around, and it's not going to be until you hit certain areas of the pitch that you're going to engage with them. So Argentina have done this. This is how they played. But actually, more importantly for us, Saudi Arabia did that as well. And they played in a 4-4-2 mid-block, we would call it. So you've got your 2 players here, a midfield 4, and then a back 4 as well. And the general idea of this, I think, is because firstly, it's a very simple way of playing. So you've got your structure, you've got a back line of 4, you've got a midfield of 4, and then you've got your 2 strikers here. So what you're going to try and do is you're going to try and funnel the opposition into wide areas like this. You're going to try and keep the centre quite congested, because obviously if you go through the middle, you're going to be much more dangerous getting towards the goal. And the general idea then is that you are going to force the opposition to try and generate things from wide areas if they can. And this is why in international football, you see a lot of what we call horseshoeing. So the opposition will try and work it down one side, it won't work, they'll come back into the back line and then play it down the other side. So that's how most teams are playing with the mid-block. But Saudi Arabia did a couple of things that are slightly different from what you might expect to see. The first one was they played quite a high line. And a lot of people were talking about this and saying that this high line could be their undoing, because obviously when you play a high line like this, what you do is you leave a load of space in behind here that can just be attacked. When you've got players like Lionel Messi, Lautaro Martinez, Angel Di Maria, these are all players who are going to be really dangerous in that space behind. So if you play with a high line, you're leaving yourself exposed in these sorts of areas. But there is a reason why you would play a high line, and that is that it allows you to compact things further forward. So this allowed Saudi Arabia to actually cause a little bit more of a problem in higher areas. So this was still a mid-block. They were still going to allow Argentina possession at the back, but they weren't going to give them a huge amount of time and space on the ball, because if you do that, then you can start finding those long balls over the top, which are easy to exploit a back line. So the big gamble is you play a high line, you try and compact the areas, cause problems for the opposition in their build-up, but then by playing a high line, you're able to actually counteract some of the weaknesses that you open up by playing in this way as well. So the big question is how are you going to stop the opposition from playing those balls over the top? And this allowed Saudi Arabia to be quite aggressive in their mid-block, and it allowed them to do something that you don't often see other teams doing in mid-blocks, and that was they went player for player in wide areas. Now, we've already said that when you play in a mid-block and you protect the centre of the field, what you're doing is you're ceding space in the wide areas to be exploited. But rather than just letting Argentina build up unopposed in wide areas, what Hervé Renard, the Saudi Arabia manager, did was that he made his players go man-to-man against their opponents in the wide areas. So Di Maria would have had the fullback on him, Papu Gomez over here would have had the other fullback on him, and then what we saw was the two wide players, so Dawsari and Firaz over here, actually playing very, very aggressively tight to their opposition players. Now, what we saw happening was Papu Gomez coming a little bit more narrow to try and create space in this sort of area for Tagliafico to get forward, and so we saw Firaz just dropping back quite deep as well. So sometimes it looked like a really lopsided formation that Saudi Arabia were playing, because it almost looked like they were playing with a back five with one of the wide players just dropping into that back line as well. And what they were doing there was they're simply causing problems for Argentina in those wide areas, because as they knew, Argentina were going to try and exploit them in those areas, and by being able to break up in those central spaces, it actually caused them a lot of problems. Now, this aggression out of possession also showed itself up in another area, and that was in the centre-back area. So we've got the two centre-backs here. Now, obviously, when you're playing against a team with Lionel Messi on it, it's very tricky to track him because he is very floaty, he moves around a lot. You'll often see him dropping into these sorts of areas to try and pick the ball up. You'll also see him sometimes just standing in an offside position. And in these sorts of situations, actually, when Argentina are attacking at pace, you won't see Messi running, you'll see him walking. And that's because he knows that when the phase of the game changes, he knows that his teammates are going to attack at speed, drag their opponents with them, and then just create all of this space in the middle, which he can then exploit. So often we'll see either Messi standing here, the whole of the back line dropping in front of him, and then Messi just being able to pull across here with the ball coming out and he can finish into the corner. And at the same time, if he drops into these deeper areas, then when the ball is moved forward into this sort of area, the back line moves with it, he then has all of this space at the edge of the box, again, for cutbacks to be played to him that he can finish from. And the big question is, when you're playing against Messi, how do you stop this? Because he's so good at moving that you have to be able to track him at all times. And what Saudi Arabia were really good at doing in these sorts of situations was that when Messi tracked forward and the centre-back pulled out with him, because they were trying to be aggressive, they were trying to stop the ball coming through the central spaces, one of the centre midfielders would then drop into that back line and replace him. So what you're seeing is a really aggressive form of man marking, but within a mid-block. And as a result of this, Argentina just really struggled to get anything out of the game. So what Saudi Arabia did really well against Argentina was they had a really good out-of-possession approach. They played with a mid-block, but recognised that despite the fact they're going to give space in the wide areas, they had a plan to obstruct the build-up for Argentina. And then they had this really aggressive approach in the mid-block, which allowed them to keep Lionel Messi quiet as well. And yes, they did get a little bit lucky with their finishing, but because of their clear out-of-possession approach, they were able to beat one of the favourites for the tournament.
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic brings you the best sports journalism in the world in a personalised experience, connecting you with the stories and teams that you care about the most. There's coverage of 13 sports, plus direct access to world-class journalists through live Q&As, discussions and podcasts. And you can try it now for free for 30 days by clicking the link in the description.